Imagine you're tasked with building the fastest, most technologically advanced rocket ship in human history.
Right, the absolute pinnacle of engineering.
Exactly. You give it the most powerful thrusters ever engineered,
Yeah.
a super sleek carbon fiber shell, and you put the absolute best pilot on the planet in the seat. But then right before launch, you give it a fuel tank the size of a teacup.
It's an absolute joke, right? It becomes this masterpiece of engineering that is completely and fundamentally handicapped by its own energy storage.
Yeah, it's like you have a vehicle that wants to fly, but is essentially tethered to the ground by its own design.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what it feels like we're watching right now in Formula One.
It really is. It's hard to watch.
Welcome to this deep dive on DRS Zone. I want to mention right up front, this segment is part of our news coverage of recent F1 events.
Which there are a lot of right now.
So many.
Yeah.
Because, look, it is April 2026, and the entire motorsport world is currently holding its breath. We are in the middle of a forced, totally unexpected one-month break in the racing calendar.
Yeah, and as you probably know by now, the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grands Prix were canceled due to the outbreak of war in Iran.
Which is obviously a massive geopolitical situation in its own right. We know that.
Yeah.
But inside the Formula One paddock, this sudden pause is forcing the FIA, the teams, and every single fan watching at home to reckon with a massive, massive controversy.
Because we are 3 races into the 2026 season and the brand new regulations, the ones that were supposed to define the future of the sport, are causing absolute chaos on the track.
Chaos might honestly be an understatement. I mean, it's a disaster. So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out what exactly is failing, why the sport seems totally trapped by its own rulebook, and how on earth they might fix it before the season resumes.
And we are pulling insights from some incredibly detailed technical analysis from our sources in the paddock to get to the bottom of this.
Okay, let's unpack this because the technical breakdown of what's happening under the hood of these cars is just mind-blowing. It's actually mental.
To really understand this crisis, we have to establish the core tension right out of the gate, because what we're seeing isn't just a simple engineering flaw.
Right. It's not just a bad wing design.
Exactly. It's not a miscalculation in a wind tunnel or a software glitch that you can just patch over the weekend. It is a fundamental existential clash between the desire for pure, unadulterated motor racing and the demands of global automotive marketing.
Oof, yeah. That tension is the perfect lens for this. Let's start with the root cause of the crisis, which is the fundamental math of these 2026 engine regulations. It all comes down to the highly criticized 50-50 formula.
Yeah, and on paper, the 50-50 split sounds elegantly balanced. It sounds great in a boardroom.
That's not the future, right?
Right. You have the traditional internal combustion engine, the ICE, providing roughly 500 horsepower. And then seamlessly paired with it, you have the electric motor providing a massive 469 horsepower.
Which is, what, about 350 kilowatts?
Exactly, 350 kilowatts. You combine those, and you have nearly 1,000 horsepower at the driver's right foot.
Which sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Like, if you are a fan, that sounds like exactly what you want from a Formula One car. Give me 1,000 horsepower.
Oh, absolutely. But the sources highlight a fatal flaw, the thing that is literally bringing the entire grid to its knees right now. The battery is only 4 megajoules.
Okay, wait, hold on. You're throwing kilowatts and megajoules at me, and I need a reality check here. Because the sources give a comparison that frankly broke my brain when I read it.
It's pretty shocking.
To put 4 megajoules in perspective, that's about 1.1 kilowatt hours. A standard, everyday Toyota Prius that you see at the grocery store has a 1.3 to 1.8 kilowatt-hour battery.
Yeah, it's true.
How does a billion-dollar F1 prototype have a smaller battery than a standard hybrid commuter car, but 4.5 times the power? How does that math even work?
Well, it works exactly as poorly as you'd expect. The confusion comes down to the difference between sheer energy storage capacity and the rate of energy deployment.
Okay, break that down for me.
Think of the battery like a bathtub filled with water. Your everyday Prius has a decent-sized bathtub, and the electric motor is like a standard drain. It lets the water flow out slowly, steadily, helping the car coast through city traffic for a long time.
Okay, so the Prius is just sipping the energy, just taking its time.
Right, exactly. But the 2026 Formula One car, it has a slightly smaller bathtub, but the 350 kilowatt electric motor doesn't just pull the plug on the drain, it drops the entire bottom out of the tub completely.
Oh, wow, just a massive dump of energy.
It is a massive, violent flow rate. The math is brutal. If a driver presses the accelerator to the floor, drawing the full 350 kilowatts from that tiny battery, it goes from 100% full to completely dead in just 11.4 seconds.
Wait, 11.4 seconds? Are you kidding me? You can barely get down a standard straightaway in that time.
You certainly can't get around a whole track. Consider a circuit like Suzuka, right?
Yeah, I
A
know.
fast lap there takes roughly 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah, and you're flat out for a lot of that.
Exactly. A driver is demanding heavy power, accelerating hard out of corners and blasting down straights for maybe 50 to 60 seconds of that lap, but their electric battery only gives them 11.4 seconds of juice.
That's insane.
The math doesn't just fail, it completely collapses in on itself.
Which brings us directly to the on-track reality. Because that battery dies so phenomenally fast, the drivers are being forced to adapt.
And not in a good way.
No. You are watching 20 of the best drivers in the world pilot these billion-dollar prototypes in completely unnatural, bizarre ways just to survive the lap.
Yeah, we are hearing two terms dominating the 2026 paddock right now, and both are direct symptoms of this massive energy deficit. The first is lift and coast.
Right. Now, lift and coast isn't entirely new to motorsport. We've seen it before. But the extreme degree to which it's being used this season is wild.
It's totally unprecedented.
Drivers are lifting their foot off the accelerator long before they even reach a corner. If you're watching the onboard cameras, they aren't attacking the braking zones anymore.
No, they are just coasting, trying to save every last drop of battery life or trying to regenerate a tiny bit of energy into the system.
The visual of an F1 car coasting into a braking zone goes against everything the sport stands for. I mean, it's aggressive racing.
Yeah.
But that leads to the second term, which is far more severe and mechanically disruptive. Superclipping.
Superclipping, yeah, this is the big one.
Walk us through what is actually happening physically inside the car when a driver gets hit with this, because it looks violent.
Oh, it is. This is the most extreme issue with the 2026 regulations. Imagine a driver is blasting down a long, straight foot flat to the floor. They hit that 11.4-second limit and the battery dies.
Okay.
At that exact microsecond, the electric motor doesn't just turn off and let the car roll, it actually reverses its polarity.
Wait, reverses?
Yes, it instantly transforms from a motor that is pushing the car forward into a generator that aggressively tries to recharge the battery.
So the combustion engine, that 500 horsepower V6, is suddenly left totally alone doing double duty.
It's worse than double duty. The combustion engine is now trying to push the car forward against massive aerodynamic drag at 300 kilometers per hour, and it is simultaneously fighting against its own electric generator.
Which is sucking up, what, 200 kilowatts?
Exactly, sucking up to 200 kilowatts of power just to recharge the dead battery.
The previous metaphor going around the paddock was that it's like deploying a parachute attached to an anchor. But our sources pointed out that doesn't quite capture the mechanics of it.
No, it's more mechanical than that.
It's more like riding a bicycle as fast as you can, and suddenly your front tire connects to a massive dynamo to power a spotlight. You're still pedaling just as hard, your legs are burning, but all your forward momentum is suddenly being sucked into generating electricity.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it. The result is a sudden, drastic, and highly unpredictable drop in the car's top speed right in the middle of a straightaway.
And that isn't just an annoyance for the driver trying to set a fast lap time. It is a massive, terrifying safety crisis. We saw the real-world consequence of this at Suzuka.
The Oliver Bearman crash.
Yes. Oliver Bearman had that catastrophic 50G crash directly into the back of Franco Colapinto. It was horrible to watch.
This raises an important question, though. How can the FIA allow a scenario where two cars on the same piece of track are operating with such a vast, invisible speed differential?
That's the terrifying part.
Yeah.
Bearman was coming down the straight with a full battery, deploying nearly 1,000 horsepower. Colapinto, who was right in front of him, had exhausted his battery and was stuck in that brutal superclipping phase.
He was basically a sitting duck.
He effectively only had a fraction of his power because his engine was busy acting as a generator. The speed delta, the difference in how fast they were moving, was 50 kilometers per hour.
In Formula One terms, 50 kilometers per hour on a straight is the difference between racing and hitting a literal brick wall.
Yeah, and the driver behind has almost no visual warning that the car ahead is about to hit an invisible aerodynamic wall. The brake lights don't flash for superclipping.
No, there's no warning. It's a recipe for absolute disaster.
So with safety actively on the line and drivers crashing at 50 Gs, you are probably sitting at home thinking, well, they have a month off right now. Just fix it. Redesign the engines, bring back the screaming V10s, do whatever it takes to make the cars safe and fast.
If only it were that easy.
Right. But as we look toward this emergency FIA meeting scheduled for April 9th, the sources explain exactly why F1's hands are completely tied. They are trapped.
They are totally boxed into a corner by their own rulebook and the realities of physics. There are three main constraints preventing a major overhaul. First, the hardware limits of the combustion engine itself.
Okay, wait. If the battery is weak, why not just turn a dial, inject more fuel, and make the V6 engine pump out 800 horsepower to cover the difference? Problem solved, right?
You physically cannot. These 2026 combustion engines are already maxed out under the current fuel flow and compression regulations.
Like, they are at their absolute limit.
Yes. The sources note that if you try to push these specific engines harder, say, by massively increasing fuel flow, you'd be treating them like a vintage car running on rocket fuel. A component designed to last for 8 races would violently shake itself apart in 2 hours.
Wow.
Any major hardware change to the engine block is completely off the table for the current season.
Okay, so the physical engine is maxed out. But Formula One is a billion-dollar engineering sport. Usually, if you throw enough money at a physical problem, you can solve it. If 4 megajoules isn't enough, just build an 8 megajoule battery and shove it in the car.
That brings us to the second constraint, weight and chassis design. In Formula One, every millimeter and every gram is a compromise. Increasing the battery capacity by just 2 megajoules would add roughly 46 kilograms of weight to the car.
46 kilos. That's like strapping an extra person to the side pod.
It is massive in terms of vehicle dynamics. Plus, a heavier, larger battery requires a larger physical housing. That means redesigning the entire internal structure of the carbon fiber chassis.
Which takes months.
Exactly. You cannot design, crash test, and manufacture an entirely new fleet of chassis mid-season. It's physically and logistically impossible.
All right, so mid-season, the engine is maxed, and the chassis can't fit a bigger battery. But what about the long term? Why not just scrap the 50-50 rule altogether for next year, just admit failure, and move on?
Because of the third restriction, which is perhaps the most immovable force in all of motorsport, corporate politics and manufacturer contracts.
Of course, always the boardroom politics.
Always. We have to remember why these specific, bizarre rules exist in the first place. Audi, Honda, Ford, and General Motors either entered the sport or agreed to stay in the sport, specifically because F1 promised them this 50-50 hybrid regulation.
Right, the rules were announced way back in June 2024.
Yeah, and these massive automotive giants invested billions of dollars based on the marketing potential of this specific technology.
Because they want to sell hybrid cars to you and me, and they want to put an F1 sticker on the showroom window to prove their batteries are cutting edge.
Precisely. F1 cannot legally or politically pull the rug out from under Ford, Audi, and GM and say, actually, the hybrid thing is too hard, we're going back to screaming V8s.
They'll all just leave.
It would be a breach of faith that could collapse the sport's entire financial backing. The manufacturers hold the cards here.
So, what does this all mean? It means a major revolution in 2026 is impossible. We aren't going back to the cars of 2025. They are completely stuck with Band-Aids.
That's all they have left.
So what exactly is on the table for this April 9th emergency meeting? What are the Band-Aid fixes they are proposing to stop drivers from crashing into each other?
The fixes being proposed are highly technical workarounds. The first, and perhaps most counterintuitive, is actually mandating a lower electric power output.
Well, now that doesn't make any sense at all. You're telling me the cars are dangerously slow at the end of the straights, and the proposed solution is to make the electric motors weaker. F1 is the pinnacle of speed.
I know, it sounds totally backwards, but it's a pure efficiency problem. Remember the bathtub analogy?
Yeah, pulling the plug.
Right now, the motor draws a maximum of 350 kilowatts, which drains the tub in 11 seconds. If the FIA mandates a cap, decreasing the maximum electric output to, say, 200 kilowatts, the bathtub doesn't drain nearly as fast. It would last 20 seconds instead of 11.
Oh, I see. So the driver has life peak power right when they stomp the gas, but they have sustained power for a much longer portion of the lap. They don't hit the invisible wall.
Exactly. It changes the actual power ratio of the car. Instead of that marketing-friendly 50-50 split, it becomes roughly a 65-35 split, leaning more heavily on the reliable combustion engine.
Makes sense.
And simulations mentioned in the sources suggest that even with this lower peak power, the lap times would still be incredibly fast, but the power delivery would be much more natural and predictable for the trailing driver.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. Soften the peak to stretch the lifespan. What is the second proposed fix?
Increasing the recharge capacity during that superclipping phase.
Wait, if the dynamo effect is what's slowing the car down dangerously, why would they want the engine to drag more power to recharge the battery?
The logic here is about distance versus intensity. Right now, the car siphons a maximum of 200 kilowatts to recharge. Because that's a relatively low flow rate, the super clipping phase, that terrible, slow, dangerous drag down the straight, lasts for a long, unpredictable amount of time.
Right, it just drags on.
But if they tweak the regulations to allow up to 350 kilowatts of recharge, the braking effect is much more violent, but it happens over a much shorter distance.
Ah, I get it. The pain is sharper, but it's over faster, allowing the driver to clear the battery deficit and get back to normal racing speed sooner.
Exactly.
Wow, so you take your medicine all at once instead of dragging it out. And I imagine that ties into the software side of things as well.
Yes, the third Band-Aid relies heavily on software tweaks. Because the electric deployment is entirely controlled by computer mapping, engineers can smooth out the deployment curves.
So no sudden drops.
Right. Instead of the electric motor giving 100% until it hits a brick wall and dies instantly, the software can slowly taper off the electric assist as the car reaches top speed. It makes the power loss progressive.
So the driver feels a slow fade rather than falling off a cliff. Okay, those are all very complex under-the-hood fixes. But the sources also brought up a proposal that sounds genuinely wild, one that completely changes how the driver interacts with the car, opening up the active aerodynamics to the driver's discretion.
This is a fascinating and highly controversial idea that would drastically change the mental load on the drivers.
Let me try to explain active aero for a second. If you're driving your car down the highway at 70 miles per hour and you roll all the windows down, you can hear and feel the air rushing in. It catches the inside of the car, creating drag.
It forces your engine to work harder to maintain that speed.
Exactly. Now, roll the windows up, the car is sleek again, it cuts through the air easily, and your engine relaxes.
That is essentially what active aerodynamics do on an F1 car. Movable flaps on the front and rear wings open up on the straights to let the air pass through cleanly, drastically reducing aerodynamic drag.
Right. And less drag means the car slips through the air easier, which means that tiny little electric motor doesn't have to work as hard to push the car, which ultimately saves battery life. Currently, these active aero zones are strictly limited to certain safe parts of the track, similar to how DRS zones have worked for years.
But the radical proposal on the table for April 9th is to give drivers free rein. Let them push the button and open the flaps wherever they want, similar to how DRS was unregulated during qualifying back in 2011.
But giving drivers that kind of freedom with active aero could be incredibly dangerous. They're already doing advanced calculus in their heads trying to manage lift and coast and superclipping. If a driver is desperately trying to save battery and decides to open their wings going into a high-speed, high-G corner like Suzuka's infamous 130R,
they lose all their downforce instantly. The car essentially becomes an airplane that forgot how to fly.
like a death wish.
The rear end will step out, and at 300 kilometers per hour, that is a terrifying prospect. You are asking drivers to manage their own safety margins while under immense competitive pressure.
It's insane. All of these technical headaches, the tiny batteries, the terrifying clipping, the unregulated air, it's completely fracturing the paddock. We have to shift from the machines to the humans driving them because the reactions to these 2026 cars are totally polarizing the grid.
The driver divide is stark. You have veterans who feel the essence of the sport has been severely compromised by this engineering experiment.
Yeah, Fernando Alonso, who is never one to hold back his true feelings. We love Fernando sarcastically called this the Battery World Championship. And Max Verstappen is reportedly so frustrated with the artificial driving dynamics that he is seriously considering early retirement.
On the other hand, you have Charles Leclerc, who offered a bit of a nuanced take. He stated that the new regulations have completely ruined the art of qualifying, where you used to just go flat out on the ragged edge because now one single lap is entirely about energy management.
It's just a math equation now.
Right. But he admits the actual races on Sunday are quite fun because the strategic deployment of the battery creates massive speed differentials, which leads to opportunities for overtaking.
And then, of course, you have Lewis Hamilton and Toto Wolff. They're publicly praising the new cars, noting that nobody can really complain about the on-track racing product.
Well, they're winning.
Right. I have to wryly point out here, Mercedes has won all 3 of the races under these new rules so far, so of course they love it. When you are the team that has the best grip on a flawed rulebook, you're going to defend the rulebook.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are really witnessing is a profound identity crisis for Formula One. Historically, F1 is a sprint sport.
Absolutely.
The fundamental goal has always been to build the fastest, most aggressive car and drive it as hard as humanly possible from the green light to the checkered flag. It was never meant to be an endurance or energy management sport. That is what the World Endurance Championship is for. That is what Formula E was created for.
But the reality of modern motorsport is that it exists to serve the manufacturers paying the astronomical bills.
The automotive giants, Mercedes, Ferrari, Renault, Honda, Audi, they desperately want hybrid technology validated on the track. They need the F1 cars on Sunday to somewhat resemble the underlying philosophy of the cars they are selling in showrooms on Monday.
It's all marketing.
F1 had to bend to their marketing, Will. They prioritized the message of the 50-50 hybrid split over the practical realities of the engineering.
As our sources brilliantly put it, they built the house from the roof down. They started with a shiny marketing goal, a perfect 50-50 hybrid split, and forced the engineers to figure out the foundation later. And now, 3 races in, the foundation is completely cracking.
It's a classic case of form following a marketing brochure rather than function. And now the FIA is left trying to patch a fundamentally flawed formula while keeping the drivers safe, the fans entertained, and the multi-billion-dollar manufacturers happy.
It's an impossible balancing act. So to briefly recap the incredible journey we've been on today, F1 is currently paralyzed by a tiny 4 megajoule battery. It's leading to massive safety risks like 50-kilometer-per-hour superclipping speed deltas right in the middle of straights.
Which is terrifying.
The sport is completely locked into this path by immovable manufacturer contracts, and the entire paddock is bitterly divided over how to patch a formula that many feel is broken at its very core.
The April 9th emergency meeting will dictate whether they can apply a Band-Aid that holds, or if the 2026 season continues to unravel into a dangerous mess.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it forces us to look beyond just this season and beyond Formula One entirely. If F1 is eventually forced to abandon these complex, road-relevant hybrids because they simply don't work for high-performance racing, what happens to the broader automotive industry?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right. If the ultimate testing ground for our future cars turns its back on this hybrid technology, are everyday consumers going to lose faith and follow suit? Are we looking at a racing crisis or the early tremors of a consumer EV crisis?
It's a question of whether the DNA of the sport can survive the demands of the modern automotive industry and whether the industry can handle the sport's rejection.
And that is something every fan and maybe every car buyer is going to have to decide for themselves as we wait for the racing to resume. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking under the hood, and be sure to follow the DRS Zone podcast on all platforms, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. We'll catch you on the next one.